Hey, my name is Ron Carucci. I'm a author, thought leader, and managing partner at the firm Navalin. Please catch me on this week's episode of the Jesse T Show.
The mighty, the powerful Ron Carucci joins the show today. How you doing, brother?
Jesse, how are you, my friend? Good to see you.
Likewise, man. And obviously, like you said, the memo, we're wearing similar colored shirts, and I think it's a great start to the Monday, man. Two Italian dudes.
It's two Italian dudes wearing red shirts. What's odd about that?
Right. It's like we're going to go take over like we're Rome or something. So, brother, great to have on the show, man. I'm excited to dive into you and your journey. Give us a little high-level overview of who you are and what you do.
So I spend my days traipsing alongside leaders who are in the throes of some really messy change. They either got themselves in a ditch or they have some audacious aspiration they want to achieve for their company, or they're trying to rise up in their own company to a bigger job. They're trying to launch a new product. They're trying to take over Asia. They're trying to convince their organization of some new important transformation that has to happen. Whatever it is, our job is to craft that journey for them. Is to sort of lay out a pathway that considers, the organizational issues, the relationship issues, the inner narrative issues of our own stories, the things that are going to get in the way of that change or the things that are going to accelerate it. And our job is to accompany them over the years, typically, it's going to take to reach where they want to reach or get out of where they want to get out of. I've been doing that for 30 years. We started our firm 17 years ago. This is our 17th birthday this month. Crazy when I think about how long that's gone. Before that, I spent a lot of my time inside big companies. I was with a big consulting firm before that. And then, what I realized after 10 or 15 years inside companies was the same behavior that got me paid well outside got me in trouble inside. So I realized, okay, well, if I'm going to have to live out my passion for organizations, it's probably going to have to be by not being part of one. And I found my home and my voice, being the outsider to organizations and being the one that has to sort of sit in and say the things that nobody else will say and offer the points of view that people are too afraid to raise. And that's been a great journey for my career ever since.
Beautiful, brother. So very similar in terms of being kind of a rebel in terms of, getting out of corporate and running my own thing. But, there was a lot of experience that you had before, these last happy anniversary, 17 years. What was it through your trajectory that called you to this work? Was it something that you felt that needed a change? Was it something that, you had a bad experience and wanted to make it right? Like, what was it like the path that got you to today?
I'll take you back to Germany in 1985. I began my career in the arts. So I began my career in a very bizarre other world in the art. And I unfortunately or fortunately learned very quickly that I bored easily. So my friends would all be like, wow, you have this great job. I'd be like, I have to do the same thing 8 times a week for how long? So I took a job with a company that sort of mixed media and arts with training and teaching and a broader set of activities. So I left New York City, went on the road for 5 years. And while I lived in Europe for 3 years. And the company that I worked for had a contract with the US military and State Department. And we were in Dachau doing a workshop. Now, back in the mid 80s, this is before Germany has been reunified. So there's East and West still. And they didn't have the words diversity and inclusion, but if they did, that this workshop we were doing in the chapel at Dachau, that's what this workshop would have been called. And it was lost on nobody that here we are sitting with military, civilian, German, American, people from the East and West in a room that's a symbol of love, at a place that's a symbol of hate. So that's lost on nobody. In the middle of this, a young soldier, probably wasn't much older than me, stood up and he said, I'm just so tired of being trained to hate. Mm. And I remember thinking very vividly, how did something we do up here make him think that? That was, first of all, fascinating to me. But I was just fascinated that he was willing to share that. And so I wanted to know more. So after we processed the conversation as a whole group, I asked him to go out for beer because you're in Munich and that's what you do, right? So we went out and we spent hours. I was just fascinated by what he had to say, what he was learning, what he was wrestling with in his life. And I think that was the point. I don't know that I named it that way, Jesse, but it was the arc in my career where I realized, telling great stories is really interesting, but entering people's story and helping them tell their own story better, that's cool. And I would probably never get bored doing that. So that, I think, was the beginning of my transition to a very different career as an organizational psychologist and a leadership development executive coach, where I get to enter different stories every day and help people make them better.
There was a lot there, and there was one part that jumped out to me that resonated with. You talked about doing the same thing 8 times a week or whatever it was, and it was you weren't lit up by it, so to speak, and you needed a change. Have you heard of human design before?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you a manifesting generator? Do you know?
I don't remember the archetypes in that model, so I don't know that I'm fast enough to be able to tell you that.
Yeah, basically it's just saying that you need to be lit up by things. You need your energy to go. It could be multiple different directions. You're not always just doing one thing. I was interested to see if you had heard of this before, because it's played a role in my life, and it gave me an aha moment. It was like, wow, this is actually really part of who I am, and I'm glad I found this. But you talk about psychological, and are you a student of like Carl Jung? Like, do you have any kinds of thought leaders that you pull from, and what are some of the systems and some of the things that you use in shaping some of these people's stories as you get into these cultures?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think my clinical work was always around family systems of origin. So there's always this Jungian stuff in there. There's Freud's in there. There's all kinds of family systems architects who understand your origin story. I do a lot of origin story work with my clients to help them understand, when I confront a coaching resistant behavior that, normal techniques are just not going to penetrate. I have to go back deeper to where the roots are.
I like that term.
So yeah. And then, now they're Tishman, all the org systems people are mostly my org psychology training. So I go back to a lot of the origins of that work when I studied. That's where I studied, to understand that you're looking at very complex interconnected systems that an org chart's not going to tell you the story of.
Yep. And those of us that are may have been in our careers harder to coach for one reason or another. What is it that you're usually finding? Is it taking it back to like inner child stuff? Is it stuff, ego? Is it, what are you finding, and how are you like mitigating and turning that around?
Oh gosh, it's all kinds of things. Well, so I mean, it's basically, all of us have behaviors and origin stories that, that we use to self-protect, right? We learn these things early on, and there's just narratives that keep repeating themselves, and problems that keep repeating themselves because we haven't addressed that original narrative. So here's an example. So I was coaching a guy who was super affable and likable, and people adored him, but he was stubborn and he talked all the time. And so he always had answers. He always had to be smart, always had to be right. But, super likable and energetic and effervescent. And so people kind of just tossed it off, but it was creating a lot of problems. And in our work together, I wanted to understand, hey, and he wasn't dismissing it as a problem. He just didn't feel like he'd addressed it, or he was always working on it, which was code for, I'm not actually going to change it. I'm just going to work on it. And so I wanted to understand. So my observation was something about always being right and always looking smart made him feel safe. The problem was he had to always be doing the talking to feel that way. And so I wanted to understand how he learned that. Well, we traveled back to 3rd grade, where he, as a child, had several different learning disabilities. He was ADHD, he was dyslexic. And when he changed schools, the school he'd been in, he had a special class for that, but it was sort of after school and off to the side. In this new school, every day when everybody got to go to recess at noon, he had to walk to the special class. So every day for years, he took the walk of shame in front of all his peers, away from recess down to the, learning disability class. And every day he vowed to himself, I will never look stupid in front of people. I will never be seen as the dumb kid. And that vow created a narrative that said, in order for me to appear smart, I have to sound smart. I have to have good ideas. I have to be articulate, and I have to be likable, which, created a well-perfected repertoire of behaviors for him over the years that became so overcompensating that he was not realizing that all the downsides and the unintended consequences of those choices. So I said to him, okay, so what is the narrative? What's the tape? What's the tape that plays? And it was interesting. What he wrote down was, I have to always have smart answers or people will see that I'm stupid. It wasn't, I don't want to look stupid. It was, he already believed he was. So the core narrative was, I believe I'm dumb.
Yeah.
And I have to cover that up. When he was brilliant. So I said, what if you believe that people will see me as smart and thoughtful, even if I'm silent? What would it take for you to believe that? So he set out on a journey to sort of reshape that narrative, to understand that, in fact, he was not stupid, and he didn't have to prove that to people by hijacking conversations and talking over them and having lots of ideas and being verbose. And that has been his journey. It continues to be a work in progress. He makes 5 steps forward, 2 steps back. But sometimes that's where you have to go. You have to go back far to a place where you were imprinted with a belief that wasn't true. And unpack all of the very sophisticated behaviors and choices that you have perfected over time to reinforce that narrative, rather than test it or rewrite it.
Are you familiar with Joseph Campbell at all?
Mm-hmm.
Hero's Journey, Dark Night of the Soul, and all that.
Yep.
What do you feel in terms of and this can kind of be situational, it probably is, but people that experience a dark night of the soul, if you've had any clients or people that you've worked with, what is it?
Or my own.
Well, that's even better, right? Because I've experienced it as well. And so for yourself, speaking for you, what was it that you found yourself doing during that time in terms of, maybe kind of what got you there, if you could share that, but then also, how did you work your way through it?
Well, kind of do you think I have? First of all, I don't know anybody who doesn't have a dark night of the soul, right? That's just part of the human condition. I think the question is, who are you when you're in that cave?
Yeah.
Many go to the dark side in the dark night, right? You're lured to all the things that will mitigate the pain that you think will make you feel better.
Self-medicate. Yeah.
Yeah, right. With things that are super self-destructive. I have clients who are in AA. I have clients who are in, drug therapy. I have all kinds of clients who are addicted to porn and all kinds of other, unhealthy behaviors. There's a way to stay away from that dark night of the soul, which of course just compounds the interest.
Yeah.
Because eventually the invoice is going to come. I think, listen, if you're anybody who's an author knows that every book is an existential crisis, and it will bring you to a dark night of the soul. It just has to, because you're taking a part of your own soul and putting it out there into the world for the world to do whatever it will with, and you have no control over that.
Bearing your soul, essentially, yeah.
And it will be dark, and you have to. And after I've done it 9 times, and still I've been amazed. This one was probably the most important one to me, certainly the most personal to me. But it has been dark. It's a difficult, painful, expedition in self-doubt, expedition in self-incrimination and contempt, frustration, identity questioning. It's all that.
Yeah.
And everybody always assumes, but those then lead to this big shining light where you come out into the blue sky and suddenly you're stronger and whatever. And sometimes not.
Yeah.
Sometimes a lot of it just stays unresolved, right? You have to sort of release to the universe, these are all the things I can't control, and you got to let it go. But I really believe the question that we're called to ask in that dark night is, who will you be in the dark night, and who do you want to be as a result of having been there? I think we all know the noble answers to the question, but they're a lot harder to choose than they sound.
It's interesting because I've experienced a dark night of the soul, like you said. People do it multiple times, and it happens from different things, from death or disability. All different things can just come from multiple different places. Sometimes just apathy and not being happy with your life. And I've kind of experienced one here recently. I'm still kind of going through it, and this one was most recently stirred up through plant medicine working with different psychedelics through the last 2 years. And all the truths that I thought that were real, especially in the world and where we are as a state, as a human being, human race, it's like a lot of those things were shattered for me. And so like now it's like trying to find my place in the world and how I operate and deal, in my day to day. And I'm just always interested to hear people that have been through it as well, and kind of some of the tools that they use to be able to come through the other side, or at least, like you said, I wouldn't say necessarily handle it with grace, because that's not the goal, but like, who are you during it, and kind of how did you walk through it? So if you could share some of those tools for yourself, or that you deploy with some of your clients, what do those look like?
Well, the first thing is you have to have allies. You have to have people on the journey with you. People who can provide you love and compassion and support, not tell you what you want to hear, not tell you how great that
Right.
isn't the goal, but tell you the truth about your greatness, and tell you the truth about the places where you're not great, but who will love you unconditionally in that moment. You have to have people who you can get advice from. You have to have people who you can. I mean, one of the worst things you do in a dark night of a soul is you isolate, right? And so it's like you turn the telescope upside down and you see the world through the wrong end of the telescope, and it's very far away and very distorted. And so almost all your interpretations of life are going to be unreliable. You're going to be hypervigilant. You're going to be second guessing. You're going to over personalize things. It's just going to be a lot of faulty radar there, and you have to have people who can help you correct that radar and help you see or recalibrate what you're seeing or what you're thinking, and remind you of who you are. And remind you. And that's hard because it means it requires vulnerability. It requires, and the time to build that community is not in the cave. Too late, right? It's the the time to plant the tree is not when you need the shade.
Yeah.
Don't dig well when you need the water. We've all heard the metaphors. Well, it's true. Build your allies well in advance of the inevitable darkness of the soul. And if you're somebody who thinks, I'm not going to get a cancer diagnosis, or I won't get divorced, or I won't fill in the blank, you are one of the most dangerous people, because, and you know what? Maybe your life has been charmed. Maybe your life has truly been a privileged, or more privileged than others, you're in your late 40s right now, and somehow there's just not been a crisis. And so you've not been conditioned to expect that. Well, my question would be, why?
Yeah.
How'd you do it?
Right.
But more importantly, how did you deflect it? Right.
Right.
Some people are just incredibly resilient, and they get body blows or life body blows, and they just don't seem to be put off balance by it. God bless them. They're few and far between. For the rest of us mere mortals, it's usually, the axis goes on tilt. So, you've got to have allies. You have to also, dig deep, right? Don't waste the crisis. It's a mirror back to you. Your pain is telling you something. It's a messenger. Listen to it. Don't push it away. Don't try and reduce it or eliminate it. Sit in it a little bit longer and ask yourself, why are you at my door? Why are you here? What is it you came to tell me? Especially if it's repetitive pain. If you find yourself saying, why does this always keep happening? Well, that's a good question, because there is an answer and there is a reason. It's not some random capricious thing, and you are part of that reason. And if you don't know what it is, this just keeps happening to me, not so smart. Or if you're on the other end of the spectrum, which is, why do I keep doing this? Well, maybe it isn't all you. Maybe it's who you've chosen to be around you. But you have to do some deeper interrogation of the dark night, beyond not just why is this happening, but really, why is this happening? And then lastly, you've got to find your own source of hope. You've got to find your own source of staying grateful, and not that let's count my blessings so I mitigate the pain, but keeping a balanced point of view, because it's easy to lose complete sight of the true, genuine blessings and goodness in your world, and the goodness that you are in those dark nights. And so you've got to have some inventory mechanism that allows you to keep tabs and keep stock of all the things that are important that you get blind to when you're in the cave.
Brother, that term that you use, I'll carry it with me for the rest of my life, and I'll share it around the world, is don't waste the crisis. I think that's it's poignant to think of it that way, versus you know, pain is one of the best teachers if you allow it to be. And not to get stuck in that place where you're always craving pain and become masochistic, but you know, let the crisis do it. Let it do its work. Let it flow through you. And I teach my sons this. You know, there's this journey. I went to Peru in March and did some ayahuasca and did some other work with, you know, things like San Pedro. And one of the things it taught me was to let it flow, let it go. So whatever the issue is, whatever the teacher is, that sacred mirror, whether it's a person, whether it's an event, let it teach you. And even if it's hard, if it's a crisis, don't just try to self-medicate, hit the booze or whatever it is, and really do the work, introspection, discernment, journaling, whatever it is. You know, take the licks. You got to sleep in a couple of days, a week extra, whatever that is, but do the work and understand. And I think the other piece that jumped out for me was remember who you are, remembering how you got here and the beautiful things that you have done. Right. And the relationships that you have. And like you said, not just stacking gratitude just for the sake of stacking gratitude, but truly feeling those things. And brother, that's powerful, man. And so are you doing this type of work today with people in corporate or in different settings? And what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. It's how I work with all my clients. We start with really forensic data, right? So I am going to make sure that before I begin a journey with a leader, I have the entire MRI of their life and their work. So we dig deep and get lots of data out. I now have a novel about you. And so we're going to read it together. We're going to read the story together and make sense of it. You will hear things you never heard before, or you suspect it might be true, but you're going to hear words from people that they wouldn't tell you directly, but they told me. And my job is to organize the story, but you're going to hear verbatim everything I heard. And sometimes that's, you know, sobering, and sometimes it's liberating. It can be both if you let it. My job is to make it safe for you to read the story in my, you know, both alone and in my presence, and to talk about, okay, well, this story means something. Let's make meaning of it together. Because before you write the next chapter, you got to understand what the current chapters are saying, and how other people are reading the story, so that you can see where that differs from your version. We might even involve a whole team to say, okay, this is your shared story. You don't seem to be sharing it right now, but it is a shared story of disconnection and upheaval and a lack of cohesion and infighting and whatever it is. And for the leader, it's a story of an inner war of, you know, agency versus ambivalence, and why I want to change. Oh, what's the point? And now you've got this hill to go take. And this is not the team that's ready to go do that. So we need to figure out how to turn that around, so that before that hill falls on you, you have the opportunity to write this next chapter of the story the way you would collectively want it to go. Once I have data, and once I've gotten people to a place where we are reasonably, not perfectly, but certainly reasonably aligned on how we got to this version of a story and what it will take to do the next version of a story, then I can construct a plan. We can say, okay, well, here are the things that it would take to take that hill. Now we have to decide if you want to go. But this is, you know, there's no simple, easy route. There's no pill. There's no, you know, silver bullet. This is where you find yourself. This is what's required. Now let's decide if this is what you are up for.
So there's a couple of things I want to touch on there. Your personal entrepreneur's journey, but I want to also start with, you know, affecting change in these people's lives, because I do something similar, but I do it as a wealth manager. And what my job is not only to help people live a happy life now, but also to prepare them and not let them make mistakes they would normally make. And so there's a lot of behavioral changes that need to happen. There's a lot of paradigm shifts that need to happen psychologically. And so I do a lot of interesting things behind the scenes. And even just one basic one that I use in the onboarding process is I use a tool called Colby, which you may be familiar with, Kathy Colby, but it talks about people's MO and how they make decisions. And it's important for me to know that so I can guide people to make decisions, or more importantly, not make decisions. And one of the pieces in that teaching talks about, and I want to get your feedback on this, is during a time of transition in life, you probably shouldn't make any big decisions. And this, you know, people could look at it any different way. So I want to get your opinion on that. If someone is in a time of transition, whether it's career-wise, you know, that maybe they've achieved at a level, but they're just disenchanted, they're not happy anymore, they want to try something else, they've been called to go do something completely different, but they're conflicted. Maybe they're having a little bit of a dark night of the soul. What would you say to that person, just that context? And how do you feel about people making big changes during a time of transition?
So what I call those liminal spaces, right? Where you're in the space in between. I definitely think there are cautions. There's a yellow light for sure on making big decisions, because your decision-making apparatus is going to be faulty at best. Mm-hmm. But if your decision-making apparatus was already faulty, now it's going to be faultier, right? Because always in times of change, we reach for straws and we think we're doing something different. We're just doing the same things we always did. We're just doing it more intensely. It feels like it's different. Sometimes, Jesse, people have no choice, right? You are forced into a crucible in a corner, and you've now, because you didn't make a series of systemically thoughtful choices, now you are back into a corner where you've got to make a choice. Where I'd say to those people is you've got to have great data. You've got to have great calibration on the choice. You've got to really dig into an honest look at the mitigating risks of the choice and how you mitigate them if they came to pass in a way you didn't want. And at the very least, break it down into little choices, right? So see how long you can defer a longer commitment, but sometimes people in liminal spaces have to take action. They don't have the luxury of paralysis or sitting still. Some people who choose liminal spaces, I chose to let my corporate career and cash in my 401k. I chose to get this divorce and split the whatever and so they were prepared for it. They are never prepared for how hard it's going to be. They always underestimate that. Right. But liminal spaces are places of transformation. They're difficult. I think the definition of a liminal space is a dark night of the soul. That's what it is, even if you didn't choose it, whether you chose it or not. But, sometimes you have to make decisions that you're not prepared to make. And you have to know how much, are you doing it out of fear? Are you doing it out of self-protection? Are you doing it out of anger? Are you doing it out of naive, excessive optimism? There are all kinds of things that get provoked during liminal spaces that will hijack your decision-making process. You have to be aware of them. And certainly if you have the option to defer, till you have more data, till you have a more calmer place, till you feel more prepared to make the commitment. Making the decision is one part of it. Actually living out the decision and embodying it becomes the rest of it, right? Right. You don't bargain for that part. Then certainly, yes, defer, but sometimes there's just not an option for that.
Yeah. Man, brings up some personal decisions to think about. But as far as your journey, entrepreneurial journey, I guess, and are you independent completely? Do you work for yourself?
I'm one of the owners. I'm one of 3 owners of the firm.
Talk about what that's been like for you the last 17 years, now that you're celebrating your 17th birthday, because from one entrepreneur to another, man, it is not sexy. It is not glamorous. It's a grind. It can be glorious at times, but dude, you know how it is. Tell me about your journey.
Oh my God. It's so funny to say is every time somebody uses the word entrepreneur, I'm like, I'm not an entrepreneur. Because what's so funny is when we began the firm, two of us who, Mindy and I, she and I are like the best of friends. We're like siblings. We fight like siblings. Yeah. We call each other our work spouses, right? But we left we were part of the Rolls-Royce firm in our field. It got acquired by a bigger firm. After a few years, it just stopped being fun. It's just not feed a dinosaur, not fun. But we said, we love the work. We love the craft. We love the work of organizational transformation. We can go do this on our own. We never said the words, let's go start our own firm. We said, let's go do this together on our own. And so we did. And then we quickly realized, we're going to probably need help. So we started to figure out all different kinds of ways to get help. And then we started hiring people. And then we had to have help with that. We never said, let's go out and decide to build a firm. We wanted, there's a lot of things we wanted that were not like what we left, right? We wanted to have a lifestyle firm, time for our families, to be able to have control of our own economic destiny. We built the ultimate in a lifestyle firm, which has its downsides, right? We didn't bargain for you actually have to market, it's supply and demand, not just supply. Yep. You have to create demand. Shit. So over the years, there's been one series of stories after another of learning we are a firm. We have to act like one, after 17 years, we are finally getting demand creation dialed in.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's maybe overstating it, but it's after 6 years of trying to multiple times try and fail to build the machinery of content and SEO and digital footprint and all the things you have to do to so 6 years ago means we were 11 years old when we finally decided to say, hey, this is probably pretty important. 11 years.
Yeah.
Right. And even then people are like, this is bullshit. We don't have to do this. What do we have to do this for? Because the phone was always ringing, right? And I'm like, it's not going to always ring.
Smart.
So anyway, here we are 17 years later, being our best selves. We have more work than we can. We're down 2 people in our firm and we have way more work. We're up 40% in the pandemic and we can't do all the work. I mean, we're having to work too hard and too much to do all the work. Is that great? Some people would say it is. I'm like, this is not what I signed up for.
No.
It's exhausting. But it's great work. They're great clients. We get to have incredible impact and we're doing it together. I mean, we're more cohesive as a firm, we have no choice, more aligned as a firm and having more fun with each other than the work overload than we ever have. So did I plan on that after 17 years? Absolutely not. Could I have crafted that journey to go that way? Not in a million years. But, I think that's the entrepreneur's journey, right? It's don't put a linear plumb line out in front of you and that's how it's going to go. Because by definition, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur.
Right. So the overnight success always takes about 15 to 20 years, right?
I always say it's at least 10 years to be an overnight success.
Yeah. Very, very, very similar idea. And it's you don't know what you don't know. You have to go through the learning. And if you're going to do a lot of it yourself, I mean, it's going to take time, and you can outsource and then that makes different situations happen. But what was it like for you when you first got started 17 years ago doing this pretty much, between, was it Mindy? You said her name is?
Yep.
So did you burn the boats? Did you cash in your 401k? Did you self-fund? Did you like what did all that look like in terms of
we all put a little bit of money in the beginning, paid ourselves back within 2 years. So, I mean, we burned some boats. I put a tattoo of our new logo on my leg. we had to rebrand a couple once along the journey, but we've never done any major high risk maneuvers. We've never had to, right? We've always had all the work we wanted. Our goal was never to build a $100 million firm. That was never. We wanted to keep it small, intimate, tribal,
boutique. Yeah.
And stay boutique. We've ebbed and flowed throughout the 17 years in terms of size, we've been as big as 25 with our affiliate network, as small as 8, it's in between. I think we've stayed core to our values. We don't do goal setting, we do dreaming sessions.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Where and our financial targets are simply set by going around saying, how much money you want to make next year? How much money you want to make next year? How much money you want to make next year? How much money? And then we add it up. That's the target. And it doesn't have to be the same. It can be well, it can go lower the next year. It doesn't have to keep going up.
Yeah.
We hold each other accountable for how we're going to make sure we live out our dreams and goals. Like one year, part of the dreaming template was about your family. What do you want to do with your family?
Yep.
And back in it must have been 2012 or 13 maybe. I had very specific. My kids were coming through high school and getting ready to graduate, and I had very specific desires for my relationship with them, and they kept reappearing 3 years in a row. And on this third year, Mindy said, "Stop! I don't want to hear this anymore." That's the third year in a row you put that on your dreams, and then you said you didn't live up to it the year before.
Wow.
So I don't want to hear this again next year. So what has to happen this year for we not to have to hear this again next year? Do you need the year off? What has to happen here? I don't want to hear this anymore. I don't want to hear it getting worse and that your relationship with your kids didn't become what you wanted to because of whatever excuse you make.
Wow.
So what has to change? And it was a real ass kicking for me. And it completely leveled me up to do some things with my son and my daughter that were hard, especially with my son, to help him make some hard choices that just being close enough to me wasn't enough. It was being close enough to me for me to cash in all the chits and push him out the door, out of the nest in a way that he didn't want to. Putting him away for a year, leaving me a year with my daughter to build a relationship with her.
Beautiful.
To set them off onto pathways and trajectories that wouldn't have happened. But I needed my dear friend to kick my ass. to remind me that you keep saying you're not being true to who you are. And I keep hearing it every year and I'm getting tired of it. And it was, it was a very powerful moment for me.
Talk about, because I can't wait to get into the book here in a little bit, but I want to just real quick about what you were speaking about there. Number one, it's so powerful to be able to, I tell my clients all the time, wealthy people have time and rich people have money. And if you have the time to be able to do what's important to you and be a dad, and like you said, you built those relationships. Like I do the same thing with my sons, and having the flexibility that being independent provides sometimes to be able to make those choices that are most important to be involved. And so can you talk about, it sounds like a dream weaving process, like where you get together with the partners, and is it something where you meet once a year, once a quarter, set it out? And what is it, the internal, if you can speak to it to a degree, what does it actually sound and look like, feel like?
So we've been lazy. I mean, through the last few years of the pandemic and whatnot, we've been lazy about it. But in its heyday, there was a template. It was annual, and was at our, we had annual offsites, and we call, probably 3 times a year what we call our Valence Labs, come together for learning and fun. We have one of those next month. Mindy has a great lake house, so every year we go to the lake and do it there now. But in its heyday, it was just everybody going around and sharing what they were done, financial, family, spiritual, physical, a holistic look at your life, at what you want to learn, developmental, and figuring out what we need to invest in, what we need to do, how do we make this work, how do we make people feel like it's what they need. And I think, as I look back on the last, bunch of years, I think our laziness and looseness with the ritual probably cost us, because it was a very powerful ritual. And I think, not talking about some really important things that then took place, I think, probably created some unnecessary tensions among us. But I think, we're in a great place now, other than being oversold. And I think I think now, rather than doing this annual event, it's sort of become this daily, regular conversation. It's just, how are we living our lives? How are we getting what we need? What is it we need more of? How do we support each other? And it's just now become part of the fabric of the firm.
Beautiful. Is there a place where you keep all of these dreams, so to speak? Like, is there a a document? Is there something living and breathing that's always changing, and it's kind of, you're tracking to a degree, like maybe not every day, but
I think some of it. I mean, even in the bigger days, we had templates we would bring together and share them all and put them on our, whatever, people could go see them. I think now it's much more, we have a CFO that tracks some of that stuff financially. I think that we're now small enough where we can remember each other's, right? So we call each other and say, hey, what's going on with this? Or how's that going? Or
Beautiful.
So someone's going to be part of institutional memory of saying, hey, this was a commitment. What can we do? When the book launched, oh my gosh, this was one of the most poignant moments for me. The firm threw me on the day it launched, they just threw me a very intimate Just Us party. And they each went through the book and read sections of the book that reminded them of me.
Okay.
And sort of honored my work by saying, here's how I see this book as a reflection of who you are. And now how can we get this book out there? What do we need to do to help support you? So it was and we were virtual. So they had a whole bunch of food and dessert sent to I was at the time renting an apartment because we hadn't found a house yet. So they had all this food and desserts, my favorite food, sent to the apartment. And we had a virtual lunch and meal. And it was just this wonderful, wonderful moment where, for me, it was the embodiment of who we believe we are as a firm.
Yeah. And it's people having your back, and that culture is so attractive. Having people that actually give a shit about you and your goals, and it's what's going to push you in those dark moments, those times where you don't want to get out of bed because you'd rather not, or because you dangle the family in front of you, or your spirituality, or wanting to do XYZ, whatever it is. Those are decent motivators at times when you need them. So I think that's a good way to help each other. So you led into it. Talk about the book, man. Talk about what it entails, and what the journey's been like for you. Is this your first book, and what doors has it opened? All of it.
This is my ninth book.
Oh, wow.
But you know what? They don't become any less crucibles. But this was my most personal. It's based on 15 years of research with more than 3,200 leaders on the topic of honesty, on how do we live lives of truth, justice, and purpose? How do we learn to say the right thing, do the right thing, and say and do the right thing for the right reasons? We're all being purpose washed every day with people and products that are trying to make it create the appearance of purpose. We're all taught not to use our voice and tell the truth. We all have our own sense of justice and fairness, but until we're on the wrong end of it. I wanted to know, under what conditions would people tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a greater good? And under what conditions would they lie, cheat, and serve their own interests first? And if we could predict what those conditions were, could we prevent the bad outcomes and proliferate the good outcomes? And that's what we proved. After 15 years of great data, we used some really cool IBM Watson AI technology to forensically analyze all this really rich data. And the book bears out, and it's a book of heroes, right? It's a book of all these phenomenal people that we want to emulate. I didn't want to tell the villain stories, the Theranos and Wells Fargo, and
Oh yeah.
We're all tired of those. I wanted to know, who are the heroes? Who's doing this well, and who could I emulate? Whose story could I learn from? And so it's a book of phenomenal heroes, people who are living lives, leading organizations, leading in ways that exemplify truth, justice, and purpose. Whose stories I can extract wisdom from, whose insights I can actually codify into ways other people can replicate. And it's an exciting book. And you know what? How far do you have to look around these days to see another example of lost trust, of broken integrity? I think the world is starved for ways to embody their values better, for ways to live up lives that are better than what the social media tells us is okay.
No question.
And I wanted to write that blueprint. I wanted to say, no more excuses. We can prove it. We have data that says, do these things, and your company's going to succumb to things you never wanted to. You're going to put yourself in that headline you never wanted to be in. Do these things, and you increase your likelihood by a factor of 16 times. Wow. That people in your company are going to tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve your purpose well.
A lot of power there, man. And are there people for you personally? And let me back up. Did you do interviews, and like, where did you get the information from? And then secondly, who were the most impactful pieces of people, and then pieces of information that you took directly?
So I did. Well, we did 3,200 interviews over the last 15 years to learn the core principles. But I did, dozens of interviews with heroes. We did a TV series called Moments of Truth, which is now up on Roku. But you can find it on the website. The book's website is tobehonest.net. And you can find all 15 episodes there with incredible people like Hubert Joly from Best Buy, with Tiffany Jana, with John Rosling, with Rob Bilott, the attorney from Dark Waters, with Vincent Stanley from Patagonia, with 15 of them. But those are the kinds of people whose presence I got to be in, right? So, so when I did the interviews, we videoed them. So that I had Amy Edmondson, John Haidt, who wrote the foreword to the book as well. Extraordinary thinkers and leaders who have spent their lives living and teaching how to create better environments where people can be their best selves and thrive. I did scores of secondary research to understand the brain, understand how are our brains wired for honesty, and what conditions do we corrupt our brains? When are our brains triggered? What are the pathways to self-awareness without being self-involved? Mm-hmm. So, it's a book of incredible rich research and data, but mostly it's story forward. These are compelling stories. I went way outside the business world. I went to LA to talk to people who come out of rivaling gangs, out of the Crips and the Bloods, to create a business together. I talked to, the folks, Marin Alsop, the Mark MacArthur Award winner, leads up the Baltimore Symphony, about Orch Kids and the incredible work that they do for underprivileged kids in Baltimore. Brian Stevenson, Equal Justice Initiative, who has spent his whole career helping wrongfully convicted prisoners. Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who led her country through the pandemic in ways the world now, wishes they could have. So I wanted leaders to understand you just can't look at your own context for heroes to emulate. You have to look way outside your context.
Yes.
And to look for stories that people who may not be like you, facing conditions you may never face, but whose stories are worthy of your time to learn and bring back their insights for.
It's a masterclass, man. It's what I do with this podcast. I there's not one person that's alike unless they've been on more than once as a repeat guest. And it's incredible, the journey and the experience. And so what would you say in those interviews that you did personally and that you learned from, what's the through line for these leaders in terms of values, ethics, habits, things like this? Like what are some of the common things you started to see bubble up? And then even leading into the archetype for the book with honesty, and then, going from there.
I mean, first of all, they're all just incredibly good-hearted people. I mean, they're just people whose presence you want to be in. They're warm, they're hospitable, they're humble, they're caring, they're very other-oriented. I think their organizations are genuinely purpose-driven. I mean, not just purpose washing, but truly allowing people to discover their own reason they're on the planet and how to use that organization to fingerprint the world.
Wow.
How does this organization become a platform for how I want to live out my life, for the mark I want to leave on the world behind me? And that's the environment they're creating. They're brilliant. Just ridiculously brilliant. They're passionate about what they see and believe. They have deep convictions. They're just people you go, wow. And yet they would tell you they're immortals. They would tell you, I'm just an ordinary human being. Many of the stories in the book are also just my clients, are people that I've observed, facing tough situation, challenging moments, critical crossroads, how to make hard choices and how they did it. I wanted to take away any excuse. Somebody would say, I'm already honest enough, or you can't learn honesty. It's you either have it or you don't, which is bullshit. Honesty is not a character trait. Honesty is a muscle. Honesty is a capability you have to learn and work at, and you have to work at it every day. That was probably the biggest finding from the whole book, is that you have to work at this. This is not a natural event. It's not a set of principles you bolt onto yourself and you just keep forever. Our brains are naturally hardwired for honesty. Our brains are conditioned to thrive physically and emotionally and psychologically in honest situations. But if we're put in environments that don't share that value, we will succumb, right? And unfortunately, unlike our cell phones, our brains don't come equipped with restore factory settings buttons. Once you begin a slippery slope, you don't naturally have a slippery ascent. Yeah. You've got to remove yourself. So it was a fascinating journey, but a thrilling one, Jesse, because I got to be in the presence of incredible people and extract their stories into really both inspiring but practical learning.
Can you, I'm like a kid in a candy store right now, just thinking about all the different, people and conversations and teachings and learnings. And, as far as what you learned and from data, from experiential, personal, all these different things, one-on-one conversations, when do people lie? Or when do people start to white lie or fib, whatever it is, a lie is a lie, right? So when do people when did that show up? Was it under pressure? Was it demands of like, what was it that kind of most people, what did you find?
Well, we found 4 conditions, right? One of them was, be who you say you are, clear identity, right? So you have values, you have missions, you have purpose statements. You as an individual claim values. If you are not who you say you are, in other words, if your words and actions don't match, you're 3 times more likely to have people lie. Accountability. If your accountability processes are not laced with dignity and justice, meaning I feel honored in the process and I have an equal shot at success as everybody else, you're 4 times more likely to have people lie. Transparency and governance. If I walk into the room and I believe that what's happening in the room is honest, the data is not been scrubbed, and my voice is welcome, you'll have people be honest. But if I walk into that room and it's orchestrated theater, the data's been spun, and the last thing you want to hear is my alternate point of view, now you're 3.5 times more likely to have people lie.
Wow.
Cross-functional collaboration, the classic border wars, sales, marketing, supply chain operations, R&D marketing. If at the seams of your organization, there's cohesion, there's synergy, there's collaboration, you're 6, this is a big one, 6 times more likely to have people be honest, because now we haven't fragmented the truth. But when you fragment the truth, when you have we, they, when you have border wars, when you have tribalism that makes you the enemy, now we have fragmented truths and I have to be right. So now you're 6 times more likely to have people be lying.
That's like COVID right now.
And it's cumulative, right? They're cumulative, so that if you suck at all four of those, you're 16 times more likely to have people around you in your life and in your company be dishonest. So when leaders tell me, well, I'm a good person, I'm an honest person, I'm like, okay. So I start querying them on their own values and whatever, because honesty, we don't define honesty as just not lying. That's no longer the bar. The bar is truth, justice, purpose. That's the definition of honesty. You have to say the right thing, do the right thing, and say and do the right thing for the right reason. It's all three, or you might be a nice person or get labeled reliable or credible, but you won't get labeled honest. So, how many studies do we need that tells us, we all lie? University of Massachusetts says we all lie on average twice a day. If I were to ask you, and I often ask my clients to do this, to look at the last 10 days. Look at the last 10 days and just isolate the actions that belied your values. You fudged, you embellished, you were curt with a store clerk, you were short with your spouse, you were not patient with your child, you were selfish, right? All the definitions of belying of who you say you are. If you were to be honest about inventorying those last 10 or 15 moments in the last 2 weeks, I can guarantee you will see a pattern. Because what brings us to our dishonest behavior is not random, right? It's not, and most of us, there's I'm sure a few psychopaths out there who are truly self-interested jerks. But for the most part, what brings us to our dishonesty is self-protection. Is we're trying to cover a fear of a risk. Or a sense of lack of safety, or some reason we're not going to be believed or seen. So we have to distort the image of ourselves to get something else to happen. We're always trying to engineer the environment around us to fit some outcome. But if you find the times you go out of bounds when you do that, what you'll find is there's a certain kind of condition, a certain kind of person, a certain situation that brings you to that regularly. It's your fear of being ignored, your fear of not being liked, your fear of not being popular, your fear that people will judge you, whatever it is, there's some core need you believe you're serving with that dishonest behavior that, of course, it's not actually meeting your need. You just think it is. And it's repetitive and often unconscious and often reflexive. But it's not random. The choices that bring us to our dishonesty are not random.
What's your hope and your dream in terms of the impact of this book? And then also, how are people utilizing it as a tool? Are there steps, walkthroughs, insights? Obviously there's insights, but like tools, practical approaches that you can take from the book to be able to be more honest.
So my hope is that, a lot of people will read it and that each of us will lie to ourselves just a little bit less every day, and be a little bit more self-honest. And then care a little bit more about the people who we influence in our lives. Again, to remove any excuse of application, every chapter ends with a roadmap, with a section, and you'll recognize this as an Italian, that it's called "Get Busy," right? Because in Italian families, there was no, empathy. And I wrote about my family a lot in this book. Empathy was practical. There was no coddling. It wasn't sentimental. It was when hard things needed to be done, you did hard things. When hard things needed to be said, you said hard things. No mincing words. From outside, people thought we were fighting, at the dinner table. But it was just living, and it was fierce love, right? It was fierce love.
Yep.
And so my, one year of my life, many, many years ago, in a really deep, dark night of a soul, I confided in my big brother, and he, some really hard things. And he looked at me and he was a little teary. He said, "I love you. Get busy." And I've used that every keynote I give. I end with charging the audience with "Get busy." And every chapter in my book ends with "Get busy." Beautiful. With a very practical set of, here's what you need to go do tomorrow, or don't wait to start this afternoon. And so I left no reason that any place in the book that you find, that sounds like I should probably work on that, I give you a roadmap. So you couldn't walk away from this book going, I'm not sure I know what to do now.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And what are your thoughts on the future ahead for yourself, for the company, for being an author, for the journey ahead? What are you looking forward to? What's coming up for you?
I've now written my 5th last book.
Yeah, nice. That's going to keep happening.
Just keep glutton for punishment, I think. I don't know. I really want the book to do well. I really want the book. I believe what the encouraging part is when I read what readers are saying, it's doing what I wanted it to do. It's provoking, it's challenging, it's inspiring, it's making people uncomfortable. It's pushing people to think in new ways. And it's causing them to lead and live in new ways. So it's doing what I wanted it to do. I wanted to do more of that.
Beautiful, brother.
I think our firm works. I think the future of our firm is bright. I hope it's with either more people or less work, but it's bright. I am so blessed. I get to get up every day, and as busy as my calendar may be, I get to leave the world better than I found it every day, doing work that I love to do.
That's part of the journey. If you can find something on this earthly plane that you get to do what you love and you get to impact people, it's that soul's purpose. It's a beautiful way to live, brother. But let me be the first one from the audience to say thank you so much for being you. Thank you for your amazing information. We'll be sure that people hear this and feel this and get it out to the masses. And thank you so much, brother.
It's been a pleasure, Jesse. Thanks so much.